Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of On Brand, where we talk about brand building and growth in the digital economy, talking to leaders across Dentsu Aegis Network and the wider industry. Today we're talking about creating a digital society that works for all. So the World Economic Forum has actually estimated that the digital economy will add $100 trillion to the global economy by 2025. But there are a lot of concerns emerging, particularly around the impact on future skills, on jobs, on increasing inequality, lack of trust in the use of data, social isolation, and potentially the impact on mental health, increasing volumes of e-waste, which is in fact the fastest growing waste stream today. So today's debate isn't just about driving growth. It's about powering the right kind of inclusive, responsible growth. So I'm really pleased today to be joined by two experts in this field. I'm joined by Anna Easton, Global Head of Social Impact at Dentsu Aegis Network, and also Senior Associate at the Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership, previously Sustainability Director and Communications Director at BT. I'm also joined by Tim Cooper, Global Head of Strategic Communications at Dentsu Aegis Network, who's worked across business, government and NGOs on thought leadership campaigns, strategy development and corporate social responsibility, and has been published by the Harvard Business Review and Financial Times. So thank you both for joining us today. Thank you for those who are tuning in as well. If you do have any questions for Anna and Tim, don't forget to post your comments and questions on Facebook and Twitter, and we'll do our best to get back to you. But let's kick off with an obvious question. Creating a digital society for all, what does that mean and why is that important to us at Dentsu Aegis Network?
Well, the concept of a digital society has actually been around for about 30 years, I think, since Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web. And we recognise this amazing potential of a network society to do good for, social causes, economic causes and the environment. And we've certainly seen that. It's been amazing at connecting people, billions of people all across the world, to better education, better healthcare, and we've seen incredible innovations to actually help mitigate the impacts of climate change. So it's really exciting. But over the last couple of years, we've seen a shift. And some of the issues around trust and transparency, some of the concerns about political manipulation have actually made people start to pause and rethink and consider whether or not this is, in fact, a good thing. And in 2018, we ran the Digital Society Index. This was Tim's amazing work. And it was really interesting because one of the things it highlighted was that 43% of people actually believe that the digital economy is actually making society more unequal and actually widening the gap between the rich and the poor. And 55% of people don't think it's actually reaching its full potential and doing the best for the planet. And this is a real missed opportunity. And we think that as one of the world's biggest digital communications agencies, we have a responsibility to do something about this. So last year we launched our social impact strategy. It starts with insight, recognizing that we have a huge amount of data on the subject and we want to share that and make that available. But it also focuses on three really important areas that were highlighted in the research. And the first is digital skills. The second is diversity in the digital economy, because of course, if we want a digital economy that works for all, it has to reflect the broadest needs of society. And the third is really a recognition that the biggest difference we can make is through our core products and services. And that's really, really important, I think, in terms of bringing back optimism in the digital society.
That's interesting. And Tim, you've obviously recently published the Digital Society Index, the second index this year.
Yep. So have it here.
Got it ready to promote.
Exactly. I fully agree with sort of Anna's kind of summary of the context and the journey that we've been on over the last couple of years. The challenge that we had was, how do you measure how well you're creating a digital society that works for all? It's a really big, sort of nebulous concept. So we've been wrestling with that in collaboration with an organisation called Oxford Economics, to really understand how you can define and measure tangible things that will enable us to understand how well different countries are actually creating a digital society that works for all. And in the end, we finalized a framework that has sort of three key dimensions. So in our view of the world, a healthy digital society has three things. Number one, it's got to be dynamic. So it's got to be growing quickly, in terms of the core ICT sectors and ancillary sectors that are really powering growth from digital. Second, it's got to be inclusive. So it's got to be extending access and opportunity to all in society rather than a privileged few in terms of skills and education and access to infrastructure. And last, it's got to be trusted. So trust has been a massive theme that we've been talking a lot about over the last 12 to 18 months, and nowhere more so than in respect of how digital technologies are being used in terms of data use, privacy and security, and also people's attitudes towards job creation and their trust that digital will actually create jobs for them in the future. So by looking at those three things, by combining traditional economic indicators as well as a survey of 43,000 people across 24 markets, we're able to monitor and assess to a fairly sophisticated degree how well different countries are performing.
And obviously a huge piece of work. How well are we actually building a digital society for all? And I say we, I mean obviously businesses and economies.
Yeah, I think there's probably two answers to that question. First is sort of the macro perspective and then sort of the micro perspective. So at the macro level, we see different countries taking different trajectories, if you like, in terms of how well they're creating a digital society that works for all. Overall in 2019, we see Singapore, United States and China kind of topping the list of the index. But once you actually peel underneath that top line performance, there's very different patterns of performance. So for example, in the United States, performs very strongly in terms of the dynamism of its digital industries, but far less so in terms of trust, particularly around data privacy and security. If you look at China, on the other hand, actually it's sort of slightly underpowered on a relative basis in terms of the dynamism of its digital economies, but levels of trust are very, very high. People are incredibly optimistic about the potential for digital to improve their life chances. And that sort of brings me on to the micro perspective. So this year we were very keen to have a more nuanced understanding of how people really feel like the digital economy and digital technologies are meeting their fundamental human needs, because too much of the debate for too long has been focused on sort of big macroeconomic indicators. We wanted a very human story to tell as well. So we developed this framework called Maslow for a digital age, essentially saying, if you take Abraham Maslow's seminal hierarchy of needs from 1943 and update it for a digital age, what does it look like? And we looked at 4 key dimensions around basic needs, so access to data use and infrastructure, self-fulfillment, which is all around skills and education, psychological, so the extent to which you feel digital technologies are helping improve your overall sense of health and well-being, and last, societal. So a broader measure incorporating how optimistic you are that digital technology will be a force for good. The bad news, unfortunately, is that across many of the markets that we looked at, it's clear that those needs are not being met. And in particular, there are some emerging patterns, for example, psychological needs scores being very, very low amongst young people and particularly in emerging economies, which perhaps makes little surprise given a lot of the headlines that we've seen recently around the impact on mental health, in particular from things like digital addiction and overuse of our smartphones. So overall, there's good news and bad news, depending on kind of which sort of dimension you're looking at. But it helps us to have a much more nuanced understanding and develop the insights that we need, both to have better conversations with our clients, our wider stakeholders, but also to help inform our own social impact strategy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great piece of work because it's not just research and insights, it's actual recommendations, practical recommendations for brands and businesses. So, Anna, how are we bringing that to life then at Dentsu Aegis Network? How do we turn those insights into actions?
Absolutely, it's so important and it's really core to our strategy. Our CEO talks about making it real, and that's what we're doing. So we have incredible insight from the Digital Society Index, and we also feed that into our M1 platform as well. And that enables us to really get under the skin of the issue, but also to create targeted interventions to affect positive change. And digital skills is actually a really interesting example, because one of the things that we see is there are brands out there doing amazing work. So we see Barclays, BT, Lloyds, all have incredible programs, Google, Microsoft, but they're very much focused on the STEM agenda. And one of the insights that we saw is that actually there's a real need for creative and digital skills as well. So we've launched a program called The Code into secondary schools. It's been operating here in the UK, and now we're scaling globally. So we've just launched in Bulgaria and Poland, and Singapore is coming up next month. And essentially this works with children primarily from socially deprived backgrounds to actually equip them with the digital and creative skills that they need to thrive in this industry, so media and digital. And that's really exciting for two reasons. Firstly, with the risk of automation and actually job displacement, this is an industry that is actually predicted to grow and thrive. So there's a real opportunity for them in terms of opening eyes to opportunities here. And the second thing is that it helps us diversify our own talent pipeline. And so we actually recruit some of the children in, we provide work placements, we also bring them in on apprenticeship schemes. So that's really brilliant because diversity means difference, and difference is really key to creativity and innovation.
Yeah, fantastic. And I know that we're doing some work from an HR and talent perspective with skills as well,
yes.
aren't we?
Absolutely. It's the same theory internally. So we've launched the Dan Skills Academy. Again, that's not just digital skills. So we have things like blockchain and augmented reality on there. But we also have things like critical thinking and also human-centered design, which I think, to Tim's point, is really bringing humanity back into the conversation. And we've just introduced a policy as well where all of our people get 40 hours every year. And that's also in response to insight from the Digital Society Index, which quite shockingly said that despite all this concern and awareness that we're not necessarily equipping people with the right skills, only 1 in 3 people can remember the last time they had on-the-job digital training. So it's really important for us in a digital business that we make sure our people have that opportunity.
Yeah. Tim, do you want to elaborate a little bit more on what the Digital Society Index found specifically around that skills piece?
It's a big theme of the index, unsurprisingly. So firstly, there was a very kind of high-level endorsement around Anna's point on the importance of creativity and some of these more sort of human skills alongside digital skills. So in terms of the skills that people believe to be most important for the future, the top 2 by some distance were data analysis and creativity. So combining something that's probably quite technical with something that's much more kind of human and really sort of harder to teach, if you like. And that's what brings me on to the second point, and the index has quite a lot to say around the how we actually develop skills moving forward. And there I think it starts to make sort of slightly more sobering reading. So as Anna mentioned, there's not many people can really remember the last time they undertook any digital skills training, whether that's on the job or outside. About half of people globally don't believe that formal education has given them the tools that they need to succeed in a technology future. And also, the majority of people are looking to government really to take a lead in giving them the skills that they need. So, despite the fact that they don't think that formal education, schools and universities have given them the tools that they need, they're still looking to schools and education, establishments to give them the skills that they need, which is a real challenge that we need to address moving forward. The other sort of dimension that I think the digital skills theme really uncovers in the index is the gender gap. So we see a gender gap across many different dimensions of the index, but it's particularly stark in relation to skills. So around 55% of men have sort of self-assessed, average or above average digital skills levels. That drops to about 45% for women. Likewise, men are overall much more positive in terms of their belief that digital will create jobs for them in the future versus women. And that creates a real challenge for us and for us as an industry and as an organisation that thrives on diversity and creativity in order to power innovation. Unless we're addressing these challenges head on, we're not going to be able to do that.
Yeah. And gender's obviously a big focus as well for us, right, at Dentsu Aegis Network and addressing that.
Absolutely. And again, that research was really interesting and really opened our eyes to the challenge. We wanted to understand more. So what we did last year, we ran a survey using insight from 200,000 people across Southeast Asia to really understand what the challenges were facing them in the digital economy, particularly with relation to skills. And it was really interesting because what we discovered is there is a whole segment of women, female entrepreneurs, who have been able to access the digital economy because they do have basic digital skills. They have skills that enable them with the use of apps and social media to actually enter the workplace after having children in a way that they would have been precluded before. So this is disrupting the rural urban landscape in Southeast Asia. So it's creating a really interesting new marketing and very powerful marketing segment that brands need to consider. But also what it's showing us is the digital economy is creating a really amazing opportunity. There were 3 areas that came up that were concerns, and this kind of reinforces the point Tim's making about gender and skills. The first is that those skills that enable them to access the economy don't take them far enough when their businesses begin to grow and scale. So there's a real need to actually equip them with a more sophisticated level of skills. And the second 2, again, sadly related to gender, one was that most of these women are self-financing because they can't necessarily get the loans from the banks that they want. And that means that obviously the payback period can be problematic. And the third is that they don't have access to the same networks that their male counterparts take for granted. So we've launched something called the Female Foundry, which is a program designed to help and support them through that journey, equipping them to actually go and access VC funding, as well as giving them access to networks and skills. But of course, and Sabrina, you said this earlier about, when we were talking about the code, but it's really important that we do this internally as well. And we have 30% of our senior leadership are female at the moment. We have an aspiration to be at 40% by next year. And one of those things means really equipping our senior leaders with leadership and digital skills as well, and giving them opportunities to the same opportunities that their male counterparts have.
Amazing.
Just going back on that's point around sort of female leadership. So we actually looked at people working in the tech industries as a distinct segment within the index. And the tech industries, generally get a fairly bad rep as far as diversity and representation of female leaders is concerned, and female workforce overall. Interestingly, we found some reasons maybe to be optimistic. So across a number of different dimensions, particularly in terms of skills, opportunities, optimism about the future in terms of job creation and job progression. We found women to be much more optimistic than men working in the tech sector, which was slightly kind of counterintuitive and goes against a lot of what we hear, but maybe just speaks to the fact that there have been a lot of programs developed over the last few years really to address this, and we're starting to see the fruit of that labour through the results in the index.
That's amazing. I mean, obviously at Dentsu Aegis Network, we're doing an awful lot internally around our programs, and Anna, you kind of spoke to a number of those. How are we working with other people, particularly our clients and partners, when it comes to driving real change in the wider society?
Yeah, that's the third pillar of our strategy. I'm really excited about this. I think it is the future of our business. I think the biggest potential that we have is through our core products and services. If you think the programs that we've talked about will always be limited in scale because we operate them from Dentsu. But when we actually work with our clients, we have 60,000 incredibly talented marketeers globally working with some of the biggest clients and really important causes and brands across the world, so we can really help achieve scale. And last year, our social impact campaigns reached 174 million people. And they included some incredible work. We worked with Pfizer in Saudi Arabia to run a campaign to increase awareness of breast cancer, which is a real taboo in that area. But we also ran campaigns, for example, with National Geographic, Bravo Tango, which is to support veterans with mental health support. And our plastic whale campaign with Greenpeace actually reached 1.5 billion people. And what's really exciting about that one is it actually triggered policy change, which of course is really important. This isn't just about reaching people with a message, but it's about affecting change. One of the programs that we have a partnership with Malaria No More, and this is really interesting because we have created something called the Creative Coalition, where we bring together not just DAN agencies, but other agencies too, along with big brands like GSK, Novartis, Fevertree, organisations that are really interested in combating malaria, and we're all working together. And last year, the reach of that campaign helped raise $4.1 billion of additional investment into malaria at a time when it had almost fallen off the agenda. So it shows the power of the industry to raise awareness, but also to affect policy change, increase funding. And in this case, our ambition is to halve malaria by 2023, so a really big, ambitious commitment there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge shift. But do you feel, and maybe this is a bit more of a controversial point, but do you feel like some businesses will be going, that's great from a moral and ethical standpoint, but does it make sense for my business? Are you seeing that, or?
Well, I think we're seeing a significant change. So one of the elements that we incorporated in the index this year was really doubling down on the relationship between these kind of broader measures of how sort of optimistic people are around different dimensions of the digital economy and how they behave as consumers. And that revealed some really interesting insights. So particularly around the fact that, the better your digital skills, the more likely you are to engage with online products and services, the more likely you are to buy stuff online. Likewise, the more optimistic you are about the broader societal impact of digital technology in terms of creating jobs, in terms of solving society's big challenges like climate change. Again, you have a much higher propensity to engage online, whether that's shopping online, using an app to get a taxi, or online banking, for example. So actually, for me, this is really great because this means that we're moving from a kind of a sort of a moral or ethical case to a really strong business case. Consumers are sort of showing the way here, and if that doesn't sort of spur businesses to action, then frankly nothing will.
Yeah, it's a very consumer-led movement in some ways.
Absolutely, we have seen a complete and fundamental shift in the marketing power structures.
Yeah.
So I think, as Tim was saying, no longer do we have passive consumers who are marketed at. They're very active on social media. The power of the personal referral is enormous. This has made brands think differently. And I think what's really made CMOs sit up and listen is the recognition that 65% of consumers will switch or boycott a brand if they don't agree with their stance on societal issues. But there's a bigger opportunity there. 88% of consumers, our research tells us, actually want brands to help them to live a more sustainable lifestyle. And this is a huge opportunity. And I think we already see leaders in sustainability like the IKEAs, the P&Gs, already stepping up and acting and responding to this and seeing it flow through into their innovation and product lifecycle. But we've also seen some really interesting moves from brands like Burger King, for example, who recently launched the Impossible Whopper. I haven't had one, I am vegetarian, but I hear it's amazing, and I heard that from a meat eater. But I think that's a really, really smart move because, consumers are calling for it, and the market is valued at $34 trillion. So to your point, this isn't just about responding and building sort of brand equity. This is actually, these are really good commercial decisions too.
Yeah, I think it was quite obvious at last year's Cannes, actually, how that shift is so palpable in some of the creative outputs of brands now. And obviously Cannes is less than a month away now for this year. What do you expect to see this year? Do you expect to see that sort of grow? Do you expect to see even more purpose-led campaigns?
Yes, we actually analysed the award winners at Cannes just out of curiosity. I think internally we were sort of wanted to see, and about 70% of winners are purpose-led campaigns. And I think this is really because, yes, they're delivering results, but they're also engaging hearts and mind. And some of the campaigns, one of the ones that we won at Cannes was for Project Revoice. And what we see is that these campaigns also go viral, so you get real return on earned media as well. So really, really powerful campaigns, and I think we will see more of that. That trend will continue to grow. And I also think we'll see brands actually turning up and being much more vocal about the Sustainable Development Goals. So I was very interested talking to SAP yesterday, who have a global goals hut at Cannes. So I think we'll see brands being much more proactive about purpose, about sustainability, about climate, about inclusion.
Yeah,
generally.
And just to pick up on that, so we launched a CMO survey last year at Cannes, and we're going to be doing another one this year. And the results from that, which is 1,000 CMOs across 10 markets, really do show the importance of sort of purpose on their sort of strategic agenda as a way of differentiating themselves and as a way of achieving cut through in an incredibly competitive and crowded marketplace. It's seen as a very, very effective route to engaging consumers on a much more kind of emotive level than they've been able to in the past. Interestingly, I think the terms of the debate are shifting slightly. So I think certainly some of the early results from the survey show that CMOs are now kind of more aware than ever that, it can't just be a marketing decision. This has to be, an authentic, fundamental decision that cuts across every single aspect of how you operate as a business. And that requires them, in order to add to the burden of responsibilities they already have, to be, pretty au fait with, sustainability and how you integrate that into all aspects of your strategy and operations, which is an interesting, but actually very kind of positive shift that, the brands are really taking this seriously and are in it for the long haul.
And do you see that reflected in how campaigns are measured now as well? Are you seeing that shift from sort of reach to real impact? How do you actually measure that in a purpose-led campaign?
We're not seeing that yet. It's really interesting. I think marketing campaigns and some really, really powerful marketing campaigns that are absolutely driving delivery towards the SDGs, we're still only measuring traditional metrics. And there's a real opportunity to actually quantify and understand that impact on the ground and feed that data and insights back into the marketing and product life cycle. And again, that's a real business opportunity. And one of the things that we've done with our own measurement is we have an ambition to reach 1 billion people by 2020 with campaigns related to the Sustainable Development Goals. And we have shifted that from being marketing reach to actually trying to understand the impact and the change on the ground. And I think there's a real opportunity there as well.
Yeah. I think the measurement point as well is very relevant to CMOs, and similarly, I think we're not quite there yet. It's sort of how I'd sort of summarise some of the early results. So we looked at the different metrics and incentives that CMOs are accountable for, and interestingly, whilst the majority of CMOs will say that yes, purpose is an important way of us engaging consumers, not just kind of in the short term but over the longer term. If you look at the metrics that they are judged on and held accountable for, the vast majority are short-term metrics, whether that's engagement, growing the customer base, return on investment. Long-term brand health is some way down the list in terms of what they're accountable for. So there's an interesting tension, if you like, between this kind of shift towards a longer-term strategy versus the short-term sort of accountability structures that we have in place for the majority of CMOs that we've surveyed.
Yes, it's a fascinating shift. So your Digital Society Index this year is the second index. Your inaugural index was last year. In 12 months' time, have you seen any significant shifts, any interesting takeaways from this year's report compared to last year's?
Yeah, so we grew the index quite a lot over the 12 months. So we started looking at 10 markets. We've increased that to 25. And I think that's given us a much more sort of nuanced understanding, particularly around some of the sort of key regions of interest in APAC, in the Nordics, for example. But overall, I think a couple of the big shifts that we see. Number one, people are getting more optimistic as far as the job creation potential of digital technologies is concerned. So last year, they were overall pretty pessimistic, but actually the numbers are starting to move in the right direction, which perhaps sort of speaks to greater understanding of the reality, behind the kind of the scare stories and the headlines that a lot of people will have seen around, automation and robotics, many of which just aren't really borne out by reality. And then the second shift that we've seen is around data use. So 12 months ago, data use and attitudes towards privacy and security felt a little bit like a sort of a first world luxury. So you'd have people in developed economies saying that they were felt very strongly about privacy and security of their data. People in emerging economies far less so. In 12 months, we've seen that completely change. So almost across every single market, you have a significant majority of people who are, number one, sort of voicing their concerns, but number two, saying that they will stop doing business with any organisation that doesn't look after their data privacy and security. And that's a real sea change. So something that started as seeing quite sort of regional or quite specific to certain types of markets is now a truly global phenomenon.
Wow. And are you seeing that sort of sea change, Anna, in terms of how you work with a lot of our partners and clients?
I think data is very much a concern. Brands recognise this, and obviously organisations, like at Dentsu, we have to take it very seriously. I think what we're seeing is an increasing recognition that there is a missed opportunity there, because with the more data we have, the more insight we have, and the more that we understand, the individual needs of a citizen, the more targeted we can be with our marketing, with our campaigns, and the more that we can actually meet people's needs. So I think, increasingly people are trying to understand how they can anonymize that data, but then actually use it to create much more effective and powerful social and environmental campaigns. And I think, we will see brands coming together to share data more.
Great.
One of the, just sort of come back on that, one of the really interesting things that we also found in the index this year was the emergence of a group of consumers who are kind of taking back control of their data and their online footprints. So they're reducing the amount of data they share online, they're deactivating social media accounts, they're installing ad blockers, for example, which all sounds quite problematic for brands and for businesses. But actually, when we ran some correlation analysis, these are also the people who are most likely to purchase and buy online. So it's almost like a kind of a new group of sort of unreachables is emerging, who are, yes, they're harder to reach, but these are the most high value customers if you can reach them, which kind of really speaks to much more creative approaches to kind of brand building and connecting with consumers as we move forward. And it's kind of it's an interesting sort of counterintuitive finding, if you like. Something that might seem quite negative actually can be turned on its head and be very positive for brands.
And because they're more open to engaging with brands on this level as well, it means that we can feed that data into M1 and actually identify. So if you're optimistic and positive about the digital economy but don't have skills, we know how to market to you. It's a slightly different lens to people who feel differently.
Fascinating. And just on that consumer point, we've actually had a question through. Other than voting with their wallets, what can consumers do to let brands know that they value sustainability and want to see change?
Oh, I think that's an excellent question. Well, I have to say voting with the wallets is always, one of the most powerful things that you can do. But I think what's different about consumers today from 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago is the voice. Consumers have active and powerful voices. So what you will see is brands who act irresponsibly, for example, we'll see the reputational impacts overnight. So brands that are embedding purpose into their organisations, and as Tim said, it's more than rainbow washing, which I love. This is about the SDGs. It's more than just rainbow washing, but they're really living those values. They will be more resistant to that kind of to that backlash, and consumers they can really affect that change as well.
Yeah.
Also, I think, let's not think about people just as consumers. They're also employees, for example, and can drive better practices, from where they're sitting, in their day job. So there's a lot that businesses can do that can be harnessed from our own employees as well as from consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got another question through. Anna, you mentioned some of the work that you're doing, creating policy change. Do you think the advertising industry has the power to make significant change and a positive impact on the future?
Yes, I do. It's the reason why I joined the advertising industry. I was in a FTSE 100 company before, and I think, really it just became evident that the final frontier of sustainability really comes down to consumer behavior change, and it's the advertising industry that has the power to raise awareness, to influence behaviour, to change mindsets. So I think we have phenomenal potential as an industry to affect all kinds of change, including policy change.
Amazing. Are there any brands or businesses out there that you particularly admire that you think are really, going above and beyond when it comes to creating a digital society for all?
I love the work that Vodafone are doing. I've worked with them once upon a time, a very long time ago, but I've been watching what they've been doing since 2007 when they launched M-Pesa, which is a financial platform for people in emerging markets. And I think then they really recognised the power of the digital economy and how it could reach and benefit people that were otherwise financially excluded. But the work they're doing today to empower women is amazing. Their research, which they did with Accenture, showed the huge potential of of mobile in terms of helping women to access information, healthcare, employability prospects. And recently, they've really recognised the challenge some of those women have with getting top-ups on their mobile. And they're working at a community level to make sure that the data is protected. So it's about, recognising the opportunity, recognise the positive nature, looking at trust and transparency and inclusion, and really working at the base of the pyramid. So I think what they're doing is amazing.
Amazing. So to wrap things up, because I know we're running out of time, but there's an awful lot to do. A huge amount of insight and research that's come out of your work, Tim, and a huge amount that you're doing, Anna, from a kind of program perspective at Dentsu and working with our clients and partners. Do you guys feel optimistic about the future? Tim?
Absolutely. I'm an eternal optimist, even so much as believing that England are going to win the Cricket World Cup, which starts today.
Very optimistic.
Very optimistic. I am, and I think it comes back to this point that we've sort of both emphasised around consumer behaviour will ultimately drive the behaviour change that we need and want to see. We've seen that sort of starting in different aspects of the Digital Society Index and the way that people are managing their online behaviour as well as their kind of broader relationship to digital technologies, which is incredibly significant, I think. And we're also seeing that in other measures of sustainable consumption and the sort of the shift in lifestyles that we're seeing. So even if businesses don't sort of buy into the the kind of the moral argument or the idea that they need to have a bigger sort of more significant stake in society, the fact that consumers are starting to vote with their wallets will soon focus minds and will ultimately drive kind of the more sustainable business behaviours that we want to see.
Yeah. Anna?
Yes, I feel hugely optimistic. I am a vegetarian, a lifelong vegetarian. I've been campaigning for Friends of the Earth since I was about 14, and I really did feel like a lone voice. I think I was the only vegetarian at school. And but in the last few years, we've seen Burger King. I mentioned they've launched the Impossible Whopper. IKEA are rolling out plant-based food in all of their restaurants globally.
Greg's vegan roll.
Yes, the Greg's vegan roll. Morrison's Morrison's are plastic-free, and I think I was talking to Mike Barry at M&S last week, and he was saying the fastest-growing line at M&S is vegan food, and I think we're seeing the same at Sainsbury's. So, having gone from what I felt like a lone voice, I am now seeing, to the point of your question, consumers are really voting with their wallets. They're forcing behaviour change. Brands are responding. I think this is the tip of the iceberg. So I'm really optimistic.
Perfect. And what a wonderful positive note to finish today's session. So thank you both so much for your time today. And thank you to everyone who tuned in for your questions. Apologies if there are other questions we couldn't get to today. We'll do our best to come back to you. If you haven't checked out Digital Society Index, you can find it on our website, dentsuaegisnetwork.com. You can also find it across our social channels. Do download it. It's really not only really rich insight and research, but actual practical recommendations for brands and businesses. So definitely worth a look. Tune in to our next On Brand episode in July. We'll be hosting a special series of events, actually building on some of what we discussed today around future skills, future-proofing our workforce for the digital economy. So do tune in. But for now, thank you, Anna and Tim. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and have a great day.